Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Departmental Showcase for the Treasury Board Secretariat. I see that some folks are still trickling in, but I think we can get started with some of the housekeeping items and some of the initial introduction slides. So this session today is hosted as a collaboration between the Federal Youth Network and the Young Public Servants Network here at the Treasury Board Secretariat, known as Renaissance. So I'd like to thank everyone who has worked really hard to make this session possible. But before we begin, I'd just like to start with a land acknowledgement. As employees of the federal government of Canada, I know I'm located here in Ottawa, and we acknowledge that the headquarters of TBS, anyways, is located on the traditional and unceded territory of Algonquin and Anishinaabe, in alignment with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to actions and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We strive to ensure that this network is inclusive for all young professionals, in particular Indigenous employees. And before we get down to the content of our presentation, I just want to we'll cover some just brief housekeeping items, introduce our speakers as well as myself. Then we'll move on to just a kind of a high level overview of what the Treasury Board Secretariat does for those who might be a little less familiar. Then we're going to talk about the work of some people who work at the Treasury Board Secretariat before going on to a question and answer period. But before we do that, I'll just cover a couple quick tech items. So all attendees have their microphones and cameras deactivated, but you do have access to a chat where you can pose question and answers and also vote on questions that you would like to see answered as well. So you have the option to give a thumbs up button for questions that you'd like us to respond to. This is the English session, but there will also be a French session held later today from 3 to 4. And we'll cover mostly the same material. All sessions are also being recorded and will be posted on the YouTube channel later. And this PowerPoint will be available as well. So feel free to take notes, but if there's anything that you hear and you miss it and you want to come back to it, don't worry, because you'll have the option of that too. Today, I'm your moderator. My name is Logan, and I'm an employee at the Treasury Board Secretariat. I am a policy analyst on strategic policy at the priorities and planning sector. And until very recently, I was co-chair of our Young Public Servants Network here at the department. But we since had two new exciting co-chairs come, and they just started a couple weeks ago. Today, I'm being joined by a couple really exciting panelists that I'm excited for you all to learn from. We have Kate Borowick, who is also in priorities and planning. We have Honey Dakany, who is in digital policy at the Office of the Chief Information Officer. And we have Carson Quell, who is in official languages at the Office of the Chief Human Resource Officer. But before we hear from those folks, I'm just going to give you a couple quick information, some background knowledge on what the Treasury Board Secretariat is, so we can kind of frame their work. So first of all, you might be thinking, if there's a Treasury Board Secretariat, what is the Treasury Board? So the Treasury Board is a cabinet committee that has a couple things that are unique about it. One of which is that it's the only cabinet committee required to exist by law. The rest of the cabinet committees come from just governmental priorities, and they can be decided on by the government of the day. That is not true in the case of the Treasury Board. Every government is required to have one, and it's formed by our minister, Anita Anand, who is the president, as well as 5 other ministers. And another thing that's interesting about the Treasury Board is that it's one of the only cabinet committees anyways, where the public service speaks directly to the political level, where other committees tend to be a place where ministers more discuss among themselves. On the next slide, we'll see what is it that this Treasury Board does. So as I mentioned, that it's required to exist by law. That law is the FAA right now, the Financial Authorities Act, and that outlines a couple of responsibilities for the Treasury Board. One of which is that it is in charge of expenditure management for the government of Canada as a whole. So that means that it oversees the stewardship of public funds. It is also the management board, meaning that it sets rules on government management and also best practices. And lastly, it is the employer of the public service of Canada, meaning that is in charge of collective bargaining between the unions and the government and creates the rules of employment. There's also Part B, which is a little bit different, but the Treasury Board is in charge of passing all new regulations that come through the government. One way that many of you might have heard about the Treasury Board is through something called a Treasury Board submission. While many of you don't have your cameras on right now, I imagine there's a lot of nodding that you've heard something like that before. Some maybe in a university governance class, or you've already done some work on that. So what a Treasury Board submission is a department and their sponsoring minister brings forward this document, and they're seeking authorities or approvals from the Treasury Board. And while there's a variety of different things that you can search for, typically about 80 to 90% of those are just seeking access to funds. So a TB sub is the third decision-making document that a new initiative goes through. So after this, it's already gone through a memorandum to cabinet, which outlines the what of a program. Then it kind of goes on to a budget submission. Those can happen in different order, but they always happen before a Treasury Board submission. And that outlines the how much of a program. But by the time you get to a Treasury Board submission, what you're really talking about is the how, the implementation, and what that will look like. So every TB sub outlines the following things. It has a plan of how a department's going to carry out an initiative. It has the expected results that you hope to achieve from an initiative. It has the risks that are associated with it and the risks that are also associated with not doing the program. So it outlines the for and what might happen if we don't pursue it. And lastly, it has the decision being sought from the Treasury Board. So that's a Treasury Board. That's a Treasury Board submission. On the next slide here, we'll talk about a little bit about the Treasury Board Secretariat, which is the department that supports the work of the Treasury Board. And what's kind of interesting about the Treasury Board Secretariat is we're kind of split into two different things. So half of our sectors, more or less, are things that support our mandate as a central agency and kind of deal with other departments. So one of those is the several sectors that make up the program sectors. And they support the Treasury Board submissions that we just talked about. They review TB subs from federal organizations and provide advice to the Treasury Board on whether or not they're complying with other policies, the risks, and whether or not the recommendation for that said Treasury Board. But as you can see here, there's a couple of things that don't quite align perfectly with what a Treasury Board's mission is and some of those other things, such as the Office of the Chief Human Resource Officer or the Office of the Chief Information Officer. So what those things do is, if you think about the Treasury Board Secretariat this way, we're kind of concerned with the nuts and bolts of how government works. So the Treasury Board submission is kind of concerned with the how of a program, but we also have concerns with how the government is using its money, its people, its tech, and its rules. So in my old position, I used to work with the Office of the Chief Information Officer. And what we worked to do is we provided leadership in the pursuit of excellence in information management, information technology, security, and access to information for the rest of the government. And those other sectors on that side are kind of similar as well. But if you move to the right side of this slide, we have a different group of sectors, and these are kind of concerned with supporting the work of the Treasury Board Secretariat as a department. So currently, I work for the Priorities and Planning sector, or P&P, if you're using a cool insider acronym. And what we do is we support the key policy and planning activities and the efficient and effective governance of the Secretariat, so our own department. So we ensure that all of our policy advice within the department is coordinated and consistent. But I think you folks have already heard plenty from me. I'm going to hand it off to someone who's doing really exciting work within priorities and planning in particular. So now I'm going to hand it off to Kate Borwick.
Hi there. So I'm Kate Borwick. Thanks, Logan. I'm really excited to be here and to talk a little bit about TBS and what it does and what has been great about working here, and hopefully to answer some of your questions in the process. I am the senior director responsible for two teams. I have something called the Surge team, which operates a little bit like an internal policy consultancy for the organization. So we don't own anything, we're not accountable for anything, but instead we're a group of policy generalists. The team is roughly 10 people who gets to partner with the amazing subject matter experts at TBS. To come in, help them out for a short period of time to get something usually across the finish line, probably a memoranda to cabinet, a Treasury board submission, a budget proposal, and then to get out and move on to something else. The other team that I'm responsible for is TBS committees, and that includes senior officials committees inside TBS, and then one you may or may not have heard of, which is called the Public Service Management Advisory Committee. And that's a group of deputies and associate deputies who come together to talk about the internal mechanics of government, our HR, our IT, our financial management, and how things are working together. So I will tell you, I never thought TBS was the kind of place I was going to come and work. This was not the place I had imagined for myself when I started in government. And when I joined, I've been here for 8 years now. When I joined, I thought that I would come in, I would work here for a year or 18 months, get some central agency experience, and then go back out and work for a line department. And instead, I've stuck around for a really long time, and there are reasons for that. One of the reasons is that there was way more to TBS than I expected. My experience with the department from the other side was working with a program sector analyst where they were reviewing my Treasury board submission draft and providing comments back. But I didn't fully appreciate all of the work that happened here in terms of setting the rules and the standards, developing all the back office functions that make government work. Because what I have found really interesting is when you understand things about project management, procurement, some of the IT and investment planning, you actually start to be able to understand how you can get things done on the front line. So how to get money out the door faster for Canadians, for example. How to make sure that it's done well, how to make sure that there's integrity in our processes. And that learning has been very, very interesting. So it has kept me here. Things that you may want to know, and I was watching some of the questions in the chat. I think what has been interesting to me is the exposure that I've gotten. I came in as an analyst, and I may be an executive now, but as an analyst, I had lots of exposure to senior management conversations. I had lots of exposure to the kinds of things that were important for front burner files to help them move forward. And it's made me a sharper analyst. The analytical capacity that I've been able to develop to put forward smarter proposals, to think things through more carefully, to provide better advice. I couldn't trade my experience here so far. And beyond that, I am an avid cyclist. There is a great cycling room here to keep your bike. It makes it easy to commute back and forth. So, I mean, there are any number of things. Maybe I'll pause there for now and pass it back to Logan.
There, I'm back on. Thanks so much, Kate. That was very useful. Good to hear from another P&P person. I think now we'll move on. I think one of our speakers is experiencing some technical difficulties, but we'll skip to our third speaker, Karsten, who is joining us from the Office of the Chief Human Resource Officer, who is back on that left side of that slide we saw a little while ago. So helping us fulfill our mandate as a central agency. With that, I'll pass it over to you, Karsten.
Thank you. Okay. I first want to just make sure that technically people can hear me, people can see me. All good?
Yes, can
Logan?
hear and see
Yeah, yeah.
you.
Excellent. Because I saw a comment that, it was a little bit difficult to hear Kate. So maybe I'll just pick up, if we're promoting TBS, I'll start with the bike room that Kate mentioned. I'm a cyclist and I love coming to TBS because not only do we have one, we have two cycling rooms. We have one on the ground floor, really easy access, and one on the a much larger one, the P1. So it's really, if you're a summer or even just a winter cyclist as I am, it's a great place to commute to and from work. So what I'll do in the few minutes that I have is share a little bit of my own story and how I came to TBS. I also never thought that I would be as long. I've been at TBS now also for about 8 years, I guess. Never thought I'd be here as long as I have. But it's an amazing place. So here's my story. I really didn't plan to get into government when I was at university. I was studying linguistics. Been fascinated with Canadian language policy, so maybe that sounds nerdish to some, but it was my particular area of interest. So 25 years ago already, I had finished my PhD. I gave a talk at a conference on how immigration intersects with official languages in Canadian society, which is what I was researching. And then someone in the audience who worked at the Official Languages Commissioner's office came up to me and said, "Hey, we in our organization, immigration, we've never thought about this as a policy area for official languages. We need to, get some expertise. How would you like to do a study across the country on how immigrants feel about official languages?" And as you can imagine, of course, I said yes. And so one thing led to another. When I was working at the Official Languages Commissioner's office, I worked for two commissioners, Diane Adam and Graham Fraser, a very respected and well-known journalist who became commissioner, and that was a fascinating experience. Um, but then I worked at PCH, and but eventually I found myself at TBS Okra, where I'm heading up the official languages team within Okra. That academic experience, I think, all of our experience kind of helps us make connections in our work. So certainly I've made it a point in my work to make sure when we need to get evidence that we lean on the academic research that's available. And also, to be quite honest, if a lot of researchers are looking to do relevant research, and it's interesting for them to know what what questions policymakers have. So, uh, the next aspect, what's the impact of policy? You might be coming from many different backgrounds and say to yourself, well, is policy something that's for me? I'll be honest, sometimes policy can feel painfully slow, and the impact can seem far away. I'll tell you a little anecdote. When I was at Heritage, Canadian Heritage, in one of my first manager jobs, I had an employee, and she came in. She was amazing, but after 6 months, she said, "You know what? I need to take a leave of absence and do something else." She worked as DG for a nonprofit women's organization for 2 years because she felt, look, I want to have kind of the direct impact on people. And after 2 years, she came back and said, can I still come back? And I said, yes, yes, So, and I said, well, why are you interested in coming back? And she said, well, I realized that, yes, I had the direct impact on people, but if I want to affect systemic change, yes, it does take a lot longer. But if you do want to do that, you have to go to the source. You have to, work on legislation or, on policy. And that's where policy becomes interesting. It's not direct impact, but over the long run, and it has to be carefully considered because it has such a wide impact. So it's always stuck with me, that little story of the employee that I had. Um, so some people love that kind of conceptual, careful stuff. Other people are more interested in the sort of fast-paced environment. And I think, like comms or more operational stuff can be great places for that. The third point that I had here, I think that's on the slide, working as a team. When I was preparing for my few words here, and I sort of ran the thoughts I asked one of my colleagues for comments. She said, don't be a snob. I thought, wow, that's a really interesting comment. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you talk about we know you love to talk about your policy stuff, but really, it takes more than just kind of analysts and policy wonks to make things happen. And she was absolutely right. If you want to get anything done, you need the help of a well-functioning team. And that means relying on recognizing, appreciating all the enabling support and services that make an organization work. That includes the administrative support. It includes working with the teams that support your DGs, ADMs, the deputies. It means working closely with your IT colleagues. It means working with facilities. To some extent, also working with legal. There's a lot of like in order to be impactful in your work, you're not an island. And I always say that it's really important to recognize and thank the people who make an organization run smoothly. um and then the final point here, yes, being honest with yourself. I think what I should have maybe added is, and also having others be honest with you. So I've had a few years in my career, and I can honestly say that when I ran this presentation by my colleague. She said, "Don't be a snob. Don't be a snob." It was an interesting comment because she felt comfortable, kind of just giving me in a lighthearted way a feedback on how I come across, and having that mirror, having someone who, having a colleague, a trusted colleague, is worth a lot. Like I'm sure many of you have come out of a meeting thinking, well, did I say too much or did I not say enough? It's good to wonder that, and it's good to then have a trusted colleague and say, well, how do I come across? And we talk about like a respectful workplace, civility, and everything. Seeking that feedback from colleagues. They may not volunteer it, but if you seek it out, it's a kind of an immediate kind of 360. I really would strongly encourage doing that. So, beyond that, getting a mentor, can be really helpful in your career. Um, and maybe the last point I'll say is, if you're wondering about making changes in your career, there's nothing wrong with being comfortable with what you do. I've had people in my team say, "Look, I'm really happy doing what I'm doing. Are you forcing me to change this?" No. Like as long as if you're happy, but if you feel like you want to change, do it gradually. I think that's certainly an advice I would give. The public service, Treasury Board Secretariat is one department we're talking about here today. It's a great place to work. There are many other places. Cherish the fact that you have all these opportunities, and at the end of the day or the week, I always think it's important to remind yourself, the work that we do is, financed by the taxpayer, financed by Canadians. It's a great privilege to be doing this work, and I approach, hopefully, a lot of what I do with that kind of gratitude and humility. So maybe I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Karsten. That was great. I think with that, we're going to bring it over to our question and answer period. I see a lot of questions starting to file in here. The most asked question actually is, does TBS have regional offices? And I think we can get that one out of the way. Not really, no. We're mostly in the NCR. I can field that one myself. But with that, we'll go on to just checking in the ticker here. What skills and competencies are most valued by or slash useful while working at the Treasury Board Secretariat? Maybe you could both weigh in on that one. I'm sure the skill set are very different for different sectors as well.
I mean, for my part, and I hope the volume's coming through clear. Sorry
it's
about that,
great.
folks. I would say good analysis skills, good problem solving skills, being curious, like genuinely being curious, willing to take initiative. Sometimes some of the work is fun, and like all jobs, sometimes some of the work is less fun, but it needs to get done so that something gets done well. I care that people have good judgment, that they approach their work with integrity, that they're willing to work well with others. One of the things I do appreciate about working here is that I can disagree with my colleagues, and we have open disagreements that are professional and based on the problem, and we work through them together. That's really important to be able to do that well. Good writing, that matters. I say this entirely from a policy generalist's perspective. So, Karsten, I'd be curious about what you'd have to say.
Yeah, no, I think all of that, and I think it's great you're leading into this because my perspective is a little, not as broad as yours, because I mean you see, stuff across the department, but I what I find people have said, so there's two things. One is a little bit of patience. Sometimes when you develop policy, it does take a long time. It's like consultation. It is important, and but can be lengthy. And I know I've had recently people saying, "Oh, Carson, now we're making this policy change that we started talking about like 6 years ago." And I said, "Yes." It sometimes really does take that time. So that's one part of it. The other is the work I find always presents something new. Like there's always stuff coming in where you need to wrap your head around it and figure something out. And so having fun with that, based on the experience that you have, I think that's critical. If you want to kind of drill down, become like a super expert, you can also have that here. But I think that ability to pivot and say, wow, this is an entirely new question, entirely new intersection of issues. But I enjoy kind of learning and grappling with that challenge.
Thank you. Those are both great. And two kind of questions around the top here that are more about HR focused, and people are curious how they can get involved. And maybe you just talk about your experience, what you see on your teams, but people are wondering if there's student opportunities at TBS and also what kind of junior opportunities are available at TBS. If you're not students, but maybe we can kind of group those together.
Mm.
So again, maybe just within the realm of your teams.
I would say for my teams, the policy consultancy team, Surge, that's a more difficult team to join as a junior analyst. I'll be really honest with you. And as an entry level position, because the speed that things are happening at on that team, it's fast. It's often fast. We often don't get the time to think really, really deeply for a long time. And often what we're doing is helping subject matter experts navigate the decision-making process. And so having the expertise and the confidence to go in and work with experts on that is like necessary for success. On the committee side of things, I would say the entry-level positions look more like some writing, some reviewing of documents. Some of it is logistics. Some of it is developing presentations or like the initial stages of research, facilitating coordination with other sectors and that sort of thing. I guess my advice to anyone, if they're looking for entry-level positions, is have a look at what the department's about. Have a look at see whose names are out there in GEDS and where there are places that may be of interest to you, and reach out. Like reach out and just ask, like say, this is a place I'm actually interested in learning about. Can you tell me about your work? And people will call you back. Like it's flattering to receive interest in the work that you do and to be able to talk about it. Like people get excited about that. If I could give my earlier self advice, that'd be one piece I'd offer. I don't know, Karsten.
Yeah, I absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Like that proactive, just saying, look, you seem to be working on something that's of interest to me. Can we chat? Like even 15, 20 minutes, half an hour. I'm just curious. And then, we see where that takes us. Absolutely. And like in my team, we're about 50 now. We have the full range of from I don't want to sound ageist, young to old, like 18 to 80. We have people who are on casual who've worked in the public service, who've done like a dean at a university who does, very specific work for us. And we've got, students who've joined us. And I find that having that range of both of professional and of life experience is really beneficial to a good team dynamic. So yep, I mean, we're always interested in people interested in working with us.
Yes, for sure. And if I could just speak from my experience quickly, I joined as a more junior analyst as well, and I've worked with quite a few students on different teams that I've been here at. And I think it's a great place to learn the government because you get to see kind of how the government works and take a bit of a step back and, look at those nuts and bolts that we talked about in those first couple slides and learn the government in a way you might not at a different department. We have a next question here, and someone's curious about how studying is and going to grad school while still working at the Treasury Board Secretariat.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I will be so glad when I'm only working again. At the same time, it's been a privilege. It has been difficult to juggle. I have had to use my weekends and my evenings, and I find my cognitive capacity is limited sometimes. Um, I have really appreciated the chance to think deeply about something. And I am finding 2 years later, it is impacting how I think about work and do my work and think about policy and how I am able to interact in groups, like huge value. Um, I would say just set yourself up with the people you have around you about what those expectations are, when they can expect to see you, when they won't, and what you need to be able to do that well. Because it has been a balancing act the whole way along. It is profoundly different now than it was when I was 20 as an FSWEP student in an undergrad program. That's for sure.
But you have done it. You're more or less done, Kate. So it's
It'll be done soon.
tentative congratulations, anyways.
Yeah, I think it's really planning, as Kate said, talking to your manager. I mean, some of the work, like we've had students do very specific work, if it's not super time sensitive, you can carve out something and people can get a good taste of what the team does and at the same time pursue their academic advancement, their studies. So it's for me, I don't think anything is unworkable, but it requires a great deal of transparency and reliability in terms of what and introspection in terms of what can I personally do, like how much can I invest myself? How can I switch between doing one thing and another? So all of that comes into play, but nothing's excluded from the get-go, I would say.
Thank you. We have one question here about while TBS doesn't have regional offices, does the Treasury Board Secretariat hire remote workers? And we do have a lot of remote employees at Treasury Board. While we are based in Ottawa, there's no Vancouver office or Halifax. I know personally I've had people on my team from all those different regions as far away as Vancouver. Sometimes they have to get up for an earlier meeting and we'll post Halifax as well and people in the GTA. Is that true for your teams as well, folks?
Sure. We do, yes. We actually have quite a few. So official languages, because you know, we need to have in the work we do an understanding of we deal with linguistic minority communities, so it's advantageous for us to not just have people who live in the Ottawa bubble, but who in Quebec City, in Montreal, in Winnipeg, in I'm just thinking Fredericton, Montreal. So we have yes, we do have people. At the same time, um, the we've learned to manage people who work remotely well, but I still think that it requires an extra. It requires an effort, and we need to be conscious of both managers and employees need to be conscious of the extra effort that has to be made when you work with remote employees. And it's the time difference sometimes that comes into it, but it's also all the social events that happen when you're within the NCR that you can participate in, and that's less possible when you're outside. So making sure that we have meaningful opportunities for interaction with your colleagues becomes all the more important if you're fully remote.
On my side of things, it's been a little bit of a mix. So my one team is heavily operational, and the on-site presence is like non-negotiable to be able to do that job. Um, the other team, it's a little bit more flexible. So we have had folks working remotely, but the balance is in person.
Thank you, folks. I'm just sorting through the questions here. This one's a good one here. What resources do you recommend to someone with no policy background but is interested in building their knowledge about the different steps and the processes involved in policy making? Right.
Sorry, the question is what resources they should look to?
Yes. Ways to improve their policy skill set, I suppose.
I don't, Kate, do you have I don't have a fixed list of resources. I mean, what comes to mind is that when you look at your current job, what about your current job has a policy aspect to it? Um, I mean, policy is a very it's a very broad term, but um, departments, have their own policies on certain issues, that so and sometimes I don't know, like last year or when we were coming back after the pandemic, a lot of people again have designed team charters, for example. Well, those are all, they're kind of they're policies, for a particular a team. It's not so. I guess what I'm saying is if you look around your immediate, what you're doing now, you might find that there are aspects of policy to that work, and that might give you an insight into whether that's something that interests you. Kind of conceptual. I mean, skills are conceptual skills, and the idea of um, looking at broader impacts. And I'm sure there are tools available that could help you, understand what makes a good policy analyst. But it's a very broad question. I'm sure Kate has a much better answer than mine.
Policy is a funny thing though, right? Like how is it defined? I mean, my definition of policy is that policy is about ideas. Policy is about ideas about the way we want to do things. And it's about being able to write that idea down and talk about it and bring people along and develop a common understanding and think about like, what do we really mean by that? And
Mhm.
so, like, I will tell you, I did not do a public policy degree. I am not an economist by training. I'm an English major who was supposed to be a musician. And for me, like, I believe like fiction is a place where you can really test an idea out and what that means for real impacts on people. So if you want to understand where people are coming from and what the impact of somebody's idea is on them, that's a good place to explore it.
Mhm.
Like this for me is it's about thinking through what you want to do, why you want to do it, how it's going to happen, who you need to involve. Does everybody understand? Is it financially viable? What risks do we have? So, like, that's kind of the world you start to get into. So, if you're looking at resources, I don't know that there's any one necessarily good resource, but to Carson's point, all of those things that we do every day are tangible things. Like being able to articulate what you want to do, I think that's a fundamental policy skill set. I think visual representations of complex ideas so that people can look at them, understand it quickly, especially if they are hyper busy, like a senior official or a minister. It's laden with technical detail, but you got to say it in a way that somebody understands and trusts the information, and that you've done your homework, and they can feel confident making a good decision. So like, go into a meeting and listen to what someone has said and then write it down and then say like, did you get the same thing out of this? Or visually represent a process and say like, does this make sense to you? That for me is part of policy work. And that's how you can practice it too.
Yeah. If I can just add, I really like the audience aspect of what you said, Kate. I think the ability to brief in an audience specific manner, and the briefing includes the visual but also the verbal. That is like that's a key skill for a policy analyst, being able to step out of the complexity of everything and understanding what the person that you're briefing needs to know and breaking it down. So going from the complex to the kind of the poignant summary is critical for policy for skills of a policy analyst.
Like, and for me, I'll tack onto the audience perspective. Like, it sometimes it's a creative writing exercise for me. Like, this is always how I've thought about it. Like, speaking points for me is a creative writing exercise. For me, it's like writing a TV script. I am busy imagining who is in the room and how this person speaks and like what is authentically them, and then thinking through how I write that so what I am saying is true and it is coming from them and they feel confident that those are the kinds of words they would use to explain this thing to someone else. And I actually find that a lot of fun. Like, this for me is fun in the job.
I really like that. Yeah, I mean, it is almost like a narrative approach you have to take to your work. Yes.
Thank you for the response to that one. I thought I was starting to take notes on that one myself. You're distracting from my moderating, but so I think kind of a similar related question. You talked about some of the exercises you can do and think, but this question is, what do day-to-day tasks look like for you? And are they similar to other departments? And if so, which departments or areas of departments might they be similar to?
Karst, do you want to start? Do you want me to start?
What do day-to-day tasks look like? Okay. Um, when you say task, I think of tasking.
Mm.
So I'll take it that way. Um, 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 many times what happens is like we plan a project and we do the analysis and we're trying to advance a policy, but then we have requests for briefings, meetings that come in that a lot of there is a fair amount of reporting requirements within TBS as well. So every day, what I would say, one of the challenges that people face is they need to pivot from their substantive work to the demands of I don't want to call it the machine, but the department, the kind of the moving files along and so that creates the sort of um, you sort of you try to plan out. I mean, I remember talking to someone who said, "Look, I just want to this week. I just want to advance this." And then every day stuff comes flying in. Requests for this, requests for that. Comments on this. And I said, well, we have to be able to. You almost have to plan your time at, let's say, whatever 60%, but then the 40% you don't know, but it's definitely going to come, and it's going to come from somewhere you can't predict, right? And so having that resilience of pivoting between the substantive and the fast-paced kind of responsive work, I think that characterizes at least the reality in my team.
I would say, from what I've seen in general, um, tasks tend to be, we need you to go away and do some research. We need you to become an expert in how we answer this question. So go and read legislation, go and read policy, go and read regulations, um, go and find a subject matter expert and talk to them about this, and come back and write down everything you've understood about this, and let's talk about it. I would say for me, it is a meeting heavy environment. That is true of my teams, because we talk the issues through together. Every project for us tends to be a group project. That is not uniformly true across TBS. That's just my working reality with the team. Um, Write an MC, write a budget proposal, write a Treasury board submission, write a deck. Like those are the types of like typical products that we come out with. Um, it's a lot of write down the idea quickly and take it to someone and see if you got it right or wrong. And if you got it wrong, that's great. So, which is something I have found very helpful. Like, tell me all the things that are wrong, which like raises my eyebrows because then I'll find out all the things that are right about it. And then we can get to some sort of common understanding about what this thing is supposed to be, which I've found to be a very helpful technique. That's a lot of what it is on my end.
Thank you for those. I think we're nearing kind of the end of our Q&A session. So I think you touched on this both a little bit earlier, but this question is, what drew you to the department and what keeps you there?
I'll tell you what drew me in. I came, and this was advice I would still give to myself now. I didn't expect to come to Treasury Board. To be really honest with you, I was planning on going to the Privy Council office. Um, but what the reason I came here is because a manager I had worked for previously, who I look up to very much professionally, said they were building a new team and called me and asked if I wanted to be a part of that. And what I knew was that I was going to work for someone I was going to learn from and who would help me grow and who would tell me the truth about what was good, bad, and ugly on the work I was doing. I would be working with really smart people and people that, frankly, I think are way brighter than I will ever be, and I could learn from them, and that the files would be interesting. And I am very happy to work with the unexpected. So that sounded great. That's what drew me in. And what keeps me here is that I keep learning things. I feel like I have opportunities to learn. I've had opportunities to move up. I've also had been okay to stay where I am at times. Um, I think that crew of people that I work with are still some of the smartest people I've ever met, and they are kind humans. So, it's not bad.
For me, what drew me here, well, it was a call from a former colleague, who was a director here who moved here and said, "Look, how would you like to join?" So, but it was funny when the call came, and I had worked at Canadian Heritage and the Commissioner's Office. I said, "Oh, you're going to Treasury Board?" I thought, "Oh, it's a dark side." It's like, what? No, like I was curious, and so what keeps me here? Treasury Board is, yes, we have, we're not a grants and contributions kind of place. We don't necessarily work as directly with Canadians as some other departments. But what I love about the work here is the need for my policy area to be in close contact with other policy areas and to see live the balancing that needs to happen of priorities in government. Okay. We all love, our particular file, we think it's the most important file. When you come to Treasury Board, you realize, well, there's lots of important files, okay? And you cannot advance one at the expense of another. So achieving a balancing act, I think, is can be a lot of fun. And as Kate said, I can honestly say that the people I work with here are the most amazing people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. So it's definitely a reason to stay.
Well, I think that is a great place to lead off and send off, go to the concluding remarks. This was super fascinating today. I learned a lot about the place I already work at. So I would really like to thank Kate and Carson for both coming out and sharing their knowledge and experience with us today. I'd also like to thank everyone at the Federal Youth Network who helped out with the logistics and organized this broader session overall. And I know this series is continuing throughout the summer, and they'll be highlighting other departments. And I'd also like to thank the folks from Renaissance My Federal Youth Network who helped support and organize and bring this session together on our front.